What's going on, guys? TowerNumberNine here. Fantasy Flight Games has previewed all 8 of the new Force bases for the Legends of the Force set in Star Wars Unlimited TCG, and we're going to go through them and discuss which of the Force token bases is the best. Let's get right to it. So, the Force token's a new and relevant mechanic. Basically, the way this token works is it doesn't do anything on its own, but it's used to activate some various other effects that can be exceptionally powerful. You just sort of tuck this token under your base when you have it, and there are some effects where you might just use the force and remove the token from play to get the effect. There's other effects that while the force is with you, which is while you have the token, you get the effect. And a lot of the cards in the set are going to use this new mechanic one way or another, and decks that are playing cards that use these effects are going to need ways to generate the force tokens. So the Legends of the Force has some new bases that are going to help with this at both common and rare. There are also going to be some non-base ways to generate these tokens, but that can be less reliable because you might not draw those other cards. So having a force token base is going to be probably your most reliable way to get the force token in play. Now, what can you do with a force token? Well, here are some of the payoffs that we've already seen, and some of these cards are really good. So the Jedi Consular here is a 2-cost command heroism ground unit. He's a 1/4 with the Force and Jedi traits, and as an action, you can exhaust him and use the Force, losing your Force token, to play a unit from your hand, and it costs 2 less. That is a really good ability, and he couples that with a pretty good stat line and some good traits as well. So I think this guy is definitely going to be a real thing that people have to think about. Darth Tyrannus, Servant of Sidious, a 4-cost villainy ground unit, 4/3 shielded. While the Force is with you, he has ambush. So 4/3 shielded is already pretty decent. Pilot Iden is 4/3 shielded when played as a ground unit, and I've seen people do that a fair few times. Darth Tyrannus ups it to the next level by being not just 4/3 shielded, but 4/3 shielded ambush when you have that Force token. And shielded and ambush have great synergy because you get to choose in what order you resolve them. So you can potentially ambush him in, put the shield on before you attack, or ambush him in, take out a weaker unit, and then put the shield on afterwards. Overall, really powerful. And then Darth Sidious, the Phantom Menace, 8-cost vigilance villainy ground unit, 6/8 with restore 2. When played, you may use the Force. If you do, defeat each non-Sith unit with 3 or less remaining HP. So you can potentially wipe out like many units at a time with this ability. And if you have a deck that's built around Sith units, it isn't going to hit your own side. So these are some examples of what the Force token can do for you, and these are, I think, going to be potentially very strong cards. So decks that are running these and some of the other cards that take advantage of the Force token are probably going to want to have ways to generate it. There are even some leaders that have mechanics that work with the Force token. So first up, we have the new common bases. They made a bunch of these. In fact, there's one for each aspect. These bases have 28 HP, so less than the 30 HP common bases we've seen in other sets, but they have this ability: when a friendly Force unit attacks, the Force is with you, create your Force token. And they all have this. So I'm showing the command one right now, but here is the cunning one. The Crystal Caves, same text as the command one, just different art and different aspect. Fortress Vader, that's the aggression one, same text, different art, different aspect. They do technically have different traits, but base traits don't do anything yet. And Shadowed Undercity, another one here, same text, different art. So these have a minor HP downgrade relative to the normal 30 HP bases, but their ability to generate Force tokens for decks that have Force units is going to be potentially very relevant. These can generate multiple tokens in a turn if you have multiple Force units attacking and you keep spending the token in between. It is worth noting you can only have one Force token at a time, as I understand it, so you're not going to be able to just pile these up and then use a whole bunch later on. It's either you have it or you don't have it. You don't have like 3 or 4 at a time. Now, one thing I've noticed about these, including in some early test games that I've played with some of the cards from the set here, just sort of messing around with what Fantasy Flight Games has previewed. These bases have a big weakness if the opponent gets control of the ground arena and you are not able to make your Force units stick. It can be really bad for you, actually. And so as a result of that, there is some reason to maybe start thinking about some of the other options, or to build a deck that's heavy on ground to try and gain control. It's also possible that we are going to see some Force units in the space arena. Thus far, we haven't, but it is conceivable that FFG would add that, so that would make things a little easier if it does end up happening. Ambush units can help mitigate this. If you have force units that have ambush, or you play, a card that grants ambush to a force unit, that allows you to attack with it immediately and generate that token, instead of having to play it out and then your opponent potentially removes it. But these are potentially weak to more control-heavy opponents or opponents who win the ground arena. And in particular, in a matchup where both players are using one of these bases, who wins control of the ground arena is going to be extremely influential in my view. So that's something to consider with these common bases. But they also made rare bases for each of the 4 neutral aspects, and all of the rare bases are 25 HP instead of 28. So they're more vulnerable, but they have different ways to generate force tokens. They're all force token based, and they're going to have some different trade-offs for players. Right now, the meta is trending towards higher HP bases overall. So playing one of these 25 HP bases might be a bit risky, but some of these abilities are quite strong. We're going to see how they do soon enough, but FFG previewed all of these recently, so we're going to take a look at them here as well. Mystic Monastery, 25 HP command base. Action, the force is with you, create your force token. Use this ability no more than 3 times each game. So this one is really interesting. It basically just, you use it. There's no conditional nature to it at all, but you can only use it up to 3 times. This base, in my opinion, is very cool because it doesn't require units sticking or making attacks or doing anything really. You can just, in fact, even if you had a deck with no units, you could still be using this to create the force token. The main weakness is the action economy, because it takes an action to use this compared to the 28 HP base, where attacking with your unit is likely something you might want to do already. So you're sort of combining your token generation with your attack, and you don't have to spend an additional action. And then the sustainability, because you can only use this ability 3 times in a game, you aren't going to be able to use this if there's force token effects that you're trying to do every single turn. At least not if they spend the force token. But it's much more reliable than the other bases because it does not rely on anything particularly conditional, doesn't need units, and it seems best for decks that might have few high impact token uses, or maybe some effects that benefit from having a force token but don't spend it. On the other hand, if your deck is going to use the force a lot, like let's say you're running one of the leaders who uses the force to use their leader side ability, this might not be as good because you may just simply run out of uses and not be able to use those abilities anymore. However, this base also makes force effects very splashable, because a lot of the other stuff requires you to be kind of building around it in order to generate those tokens. This one doesn't. So if you have just like a few cards that you want to put into a deck that otherwise doesn't play force units, this base might be a good option. Next up, we have the Tomb of Isle Ram. I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce this. I do remember this location. I believe it is in the Jedi Fallen Order video game, and the art actually captures it pretty well. Bases in general in this game have really cool art, but as an action, exhaust a friendly unit. The force is with you. Create your force token. So this base is going to allow you to exhaust any friendly unit for a force token, and that exhausted unit doesn't have to be a force unit. You can use this potentially with a spaceship. You can use this with, I don't know, a battle droid token. So this is generally worse than the common bases for force units, because force units are going to be able to generate that token while attacking instead of having to take an action and exhaust to do nothing. But the option to use non-force units is interesting. It makes it more flexible. Maybe in a deck that has more units in space, this which don't have the force trait, or just runs a bunch of units that don't have the force trait, especially smaller units, this might be an option that allows you to generate those tokens without having as much of a constraint on it. I think decks that are really swarmy, so if you have a bunch of tokens, especially like the weaker tokens, the battle droids, the TIE fighters, exhausting them for a force token seems like it could well be a good deal, and it can be used multiple times in a turn if you have a bunch of units that you want to exhaust. However, like the common bases, it does require things to stick to at least some degree, even if it's more flexible in terms of allowing non-force units to be used. Overall, it's going to be easier to use this than the common bases in some ways, but the payoff is somewhat worse because you have to exhaust one of your own units to use it. It has 25 HP. I'm a little skeptical of this one, to be honest with you, but I can definitely see some situations where I would rather have this than one of the other bases. Next up, we have the Temple of Destruction. This is an aggression base, and it really plays into the aggro side of things. So this base is going to give you a token when a friendly unit deals 3 or more combat damage to an enemy base. Doesn't require a force unit. but it does require 3 or more damage. It has to be damage from combat, and it has to hit the base. It's notable that this works with a bunch of space aggro units. So both of the A-Wings, one of them is a 1/3 raid 2, one of them is a 3/2. Both of those can swing in and generate a token. A lot of ground units have 3 or more power. You have those 3-cost 3/4s or 3/5s. Even some starting ground units like Battlefield Marine have 3 power. So this one is more restrictive than the 28 HP bases in some ways, but it's less in others. So you have to attack the base and you have to do at least 3 damage, but it doesn't have to be a force unit. So this is going to give you a lot more flexibility in deck building, I think, relative to the 25 HP bases. It seems best suited to an aggro strategy where you're going to want to be attacking the base anyway. It does require combat damage to work, though. So if you have something that's dealing damage to the enemy base with an ability, but it's not combat, that will not work. So if you play K2SO and the opponent defeats him and you use his when defeated ability to deal 3 damage to the enemy base, that does not work with the Temple of Destruction because it's not combat damage. So like some of the others we've seen, units do need to stick for this one, but it's a little more flexible. There are a bunch of space units you can use to potentially trigger this, and it seems to go very well into an aggro strategy. One other note is that aggro strategies usually don't care as much about their own base HP because they're trying to eliminate the opponent's base before the opponent stabilizes. So this one seems especially suited for an aggro deck that uses a bunch of force effects, both because it plays into what the strategy is already trying to do. It gives you some more flexibility in terms of space and ground and that sort of thing, and also because your own base HP isn't as important. Next up, we have the Vergence Temple, which gives you a force token when the regroup phase starts if you control a unit with 4 or more remaining HP. And this is interesting. So it only works once per turn, unlike some of the others. But it's pretty reliable compared to some. It's easy to get it on turn 1. All you have to do is play a unit with 4 HP on the first turn. Often the opponent doesn't have any way to mess with the unit that you play on the first turn. So, you just play R2D2. There are a large number of 1/4 and 2/4 units that cost 1 or 2 resources. So it should be pretty easy to get this going. Damage, however, can block this effect from going off. So if you play that 1/4 R2D2 and the opponent then pings it with something that does 1 damage, like they play an ISB agent or something, your unit no longer has 4 or more remaining HP because it is based on remaining HP and not base HP. And for that reason, ping damage and other effects can potentially block this effect from going off, even if you're playing units that have high base HP. However, one other thing to consider is that the vigilance aspect has a lot of healing, which may make it a little safer than some of the other rare bases where 25 HP would be a bigger downside. 25 HP is a downside, but if you're playing a deck that has a lot of restore, it may not matter as much as if you're playing one that doesn't have those options. It is worth noting this is still a base that requires specific units to work well, but it's not going to be all that hard to build around because especially as you start moving up the cost curve and playing later game units, many of those are going to have 4 or more remaining HP anyway. I think every leader in the game has 4 or more HP, so just flipping your leader and not having them immediately die or take damage is going to be sufficient to get this going. So this one's pretty interesting. I think at present, I think I like it more than the 28 HP bases, but I have not tested with this at all yet. I have not done any preview games with this. I'm optimistic on it on preview, but it's going to require some testing to know for sure. It's worth noting that in addition to these bases, you can add other ways to generate force. So these are just a few examples. Youngling Padawan, 2-cost Cunning Heroism Ground Unit, 2/3 Force Jedi. When played, the Force is with you. Drain Essence, 2-cost Vigilance Villainy. Just an event that does 2 damage to a unit, and the Force is with you. Create your Force token when you play it. Directed by the Force is an interesting one. So 1-cost event that says the Force is with you, and you may play a unit from your hand. So you have to pay the cost. So playing a unit for its normal cost isn't like super tight, but it does mean there's some action compression. So you're not just spending an action to get this force token. You can also do part of what you might otherwise be doing in the turn. So these sorts of cards can be included to give you more ways to generate force tokens if you're not sure that the base is going to do enough for you. Just something to consider. And so the question then becomes, which of these bases is going to prove to be the best? I think it's going to depend a lot on the specific deck composition you want. The 28 HP bases are good if you can get force units to stick on the board. Some of the rare bases are probably going to be more reliable or less conditional, though they might have conditions of their own. They do also lose you HP, which may or may not be a big deal depending on how aggro your deck is, how much healing you have, those kind of things. Other meta factors are going to be relevant. If everyone starts playing Sabine and the meta is super fast, 25 HP is going to be more of a problem. I personally like Mystic Monastery the most. I think that's the 25 HP one where you can just take an action to get a force token up to 3 times per game. But there's a lot more cards to be previewed, and it's going to be interesting to see both other ways to get the force token, other ways to spend it, and other cards that might interact with it one way or another and give some changes to these ratings. So yeah, those are the new force token bases, both the common and rare ones. And I'm curious, what do you think? Does one of these bases really jump out to you as being the best one? Is there one that you're most excited to play with? Let me know what you think in the comments below. I'd be curious to hear the viewers' opinions. That's going to do it for this one, guys. If you liked this video, please like the video. If you disliked the video, please dislike the video. That I know that sounds weird, but I do actually check like dislike ratios. And yeah, that we're going to be back later with some more Star Wars Unlimited content. I will see you guys soon. Catch you all later.